very much, Michael. My name is Stefan. I am the co-owner of Wisehands Detail Landscape Maintenance Professional Gardening Services, along with my co-owner, Mallory. My background was at Wilcox Nursery, which I still frequent, but I'm no longer there. And I'm also the proud vice president of the Pinellas Chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. And today we're going to be talking about native grasses. So some things we're going to kind of talk about today. Just very simple. What is a grass? Just some simple identifying features. This isn't going to be an in-depth identification and of the parts of grasses. They're very different than common wildflowers and shrubs. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some common invasive, exotic, and then our native grasses of Florida. We're going to talk about our ecological benefits, which is what we're all about here at FNPS, which is awesome. And then how to use it in a design and aesthetically beneficial to a yard that you want to maintain to be looking good for your neighbors so they understand kind of what you're going for, especially if you're doing something more natural like a meadow or a dunescape. And then, of course, because we're coming from Wisehands, we do maintenance. We maintain native plants. We'll talk a little bit about that. Some challenges, there's not a lot, and I'm really looking forward to what everybody else has to say about that. And then I'm going to try to go through some very simple families of native grasses that you might be familiar with. So Poaceae is the order of grasses, the family of grasses, the plant. There's 447 species in Florida, which is a pretty large diversity of species. Unfortunately, we have a ton of invasive species and exotic species, so I wasn't able to just talk about the native ones without also introducing some of those exotic invasive ones, because a lot of them are lookalikes, unfortunately. But I think it's important for everybody to know about some of these exotic grasses as well. You can see those on the left. Turf grasses are mostly exotic. Doesn't necessarily mean they're invasive. They can be difficult in landscapes, especially when there is large, thick St. Augustine turf grass right next to a more natural native landscape. I find with our company and with our maintenance, we're always cutting out St. Augustine grass, actually, because it runs pretty aggressively. But those are just a few I see a lot. The white fountain grass, especially on the beach. Guinea grass is one that I've been encountering a lot. Looks a little like Fakahatchee grass. And then I'm sure everybody has experienced torpedo grass in one way or the other. Very challenging, but is possible to get rid of it. And then these are the native grasses we're going to talk about. And they have families. There's multiple ones in each one, which is cool because I think we're just on the precipice of being able to offer a huge diversity of native Florida plants, including grasses, that have a lot of ornamental value to them. And we've just scratched the surface of what we can actually offer in the native plant world. I know a lot of you have every native plant that Wilcox or Sweet Bay has ever put out before. You also trade amongst yourselves, which is awesome. But there's more that are going to be coming out in the future with that ornamental horticultural value. And then, of course, the habitat value. So those are some of the ones we're going to talk about today. All right. Okay, so some identifying features. Don't get lost in the grasses, of course. Those are some things that you can use to identify them. The things I usually use are the actual leaf, the flower or fruit, and then the rhizomes. So some things will run along the surface, which is a stolon, and some things are actually underground, which is a rhizome. That's just how it grows. So for example, St. Augustine grass has a stolon. It generally runs across the top of the ground, but I've also seen it go underneath with a rhizome. A few things there, not so important to know all those things, but the leaf, the flower, the fruit, and then how the roots look are really good identifying features. It can be pretty easy to actually start identifying some of these grasses over time. Initially, it can be pretty difficult because It's grass. Maybe it all looks the same, but there is some differences that you can highlight there. Ecological benefits. And also I just want to tell everybody that I'm really looking forward to answering any questions and to hearing your different comments about what you guys have done in your own yard with some of these grasses, maybe some grasses that you've discovered for yourself that aren't available horticulturally, but maybe you already had them growing in your yard. You learned about them, how you like to use them. I think it's essential for a successful habitat, especially in Florida, to have our native bunch grasses, no matter what kind of habitat you're dealing with. So that's that foundational plant, very important. The grass itself, it has seed heads on it. It has a fruit. You'll see birds using it. You'll see smaller mammals using it. And it also kind of acts as, which I thought was really cool. I talked to Bruce from Wilcox about this. It's a nursery for seedlings. So if you have some grasses in your yard, you might have noticed, especially if you have a lot of native plants, that there tends to be a lot of seedlings that will accumulate underneath those skirts and those folds of grasses that over time actually form like a little micro climate in there. Let's say with the muley grass, it gets so thick, I've seen it underneath where it's really moist, where the rest of the area could be dry, and you will see some seeding in there from some of your native plants that you might have nearby. So that was something cool that Bruce brought to my attention that I hadn't really thought about before, that it's a small nursery, if you will. The soil stabilization, you see it all the time when people mow up against, let's say, a pond that's gonna eventually erode. It might not be right away, but over time it will erode. And if you put in native grasses, for example, using something that's a little more moisture tolerant, like our Fakahatchee grasses, against the edge of a pond or a moist area, all those ecological benefits that we're talking about here, and it's much more aesthetically pleasing. I think it's much more beautiful. You see a lot of these, I always bring up these retention ponds that are just these green goo, and I've even seen some now where they put like fake swans in it. Like, who's ever seen a swan in Pinellas Park? I haven't, but it's gotten to the point where it's so bad that the whole retention pond is just completely devoid of life. It's totally dead. They can't even keep koi fish alive in it. Starting to put some of those tough native plants along the edge that do have an ornamental value is going to be a big step moving forward as we start to look at those retention ponds as valuable resources for birds and different types of creatures in Florida that need that. So aesthetic and design benefits, how are you going to use this in your own setting, or if you're a designer, or if you're helping someone design, or if you're having us do it, or whatever. It has so many aesthetic and design benefits. And, some of these pictures, some people might look at and say, that's maybe too messy. But what you can do is you can take out some of those elements and you can distill it down and use it in your own yard. So if you want that naturalistic design, use it as a border, use it as an edge, put it in curving lines, your bunch grasses. The linear leaves, that creates a different types of texture. You have the Fakahatchee grass, for example, with a thicker leaf, creates that kind of thicker texture to it. And then let's say something like a muley grass that has a much thinner leaf. So what kind of texture do you want? And then it's a great way to fill in that empty space. So if we have, that's the challenge at times with our native plants is, I want something that looks exactly like this all year. Generally, even with exotic plants, that's near impossible. But with native plants, it's really important that we plant a diversity of things that are going to be blooming and going to seed at different times of the year. And when something, let's say, dies back, even though from our perspective, we can look at that and say, that has an inherent beauty in and of itself. For example, an ironweed going dormant, well, that's still beautiful. It has those seed heads. It has an ornamental value, and we can see that. It has that seasonal value too. But if you have a grass nearby that, let's say, blooms in the fall, like our muley grasses, and has a distinct shape pretty much all year, you can have those seasonal layers in between where your grasses are. care and maintenance, obviously important. You know, it's a big thing to have. So other than hiring us or hiring another company or having your friends get together and do it or doing it on your own, you have to start in the first phase and understand where these grasses are going to go and how they act. Make sure you know where you're going to be putting them. You know, care is pretty simple for most of these. Let it grow to a space. Sand cordgrass, for example, gets quite large. If you've ever been to Seminole Library at Seminole SPC on 102nd Avenue leading up to the Seminole Library is some beautiful stands of sand cordgrass that run along the median. And I think the city did a great job there, but they get big. They get really big. And I think they're a little bit too big for that space. For example, like sand cordgrass, maybe 6 feet wide, you know, maybe even wider. I mean, that's a huge grass. So understanding how big something is going to get. Usually they're pretty drought tolerant. I have seen some things, for example, like an Elliott's love grass will rot if it's overwatered and in too much shade. But then there are some grasses that will just go kaput as well because they like to have a little more moisture to establish themselves. But once you establish that grass, it's pretty much going to be there. So you have the excess thatch that we talked about. I like to prune grasses back, generally in late dormancy period. So right before it's supposed to be putting out its new growth. That's generally what you would do with stuff that is dormant. You don't want to prune it too early in the dormant season. I've had grasses just die on me because I cut it back too hard. Again, I talk about the Elliott's love grass. I cut it back just as I would with a muley, which is much more forgiving of a pretty aggressive cutback. Elliott's did not come back for me, unfortunately. So understand where you're putting them, what kind of environment they need, and when to prune those back. Also, the other side of it, you don't ever have to prune it back. There's no rule on that. Maybe naturally fire would have gone through and cleared out some of that excess thatch. If you want to cut out some pieces and throw it in your fire pit or light a little fire in your front yard, as long as your neighbors understand what you're doing and not going crazy, then you can do that. So just some simple, I would say simple challenges. You know, I really was trying to think of, other than knowing the right plant, the right place, things like that, what kind of challenges are there? They're the same challenges you would have horticulturally with anything generally. Knowing the plant, know what it's all about. Best thing I always tell people to do, go take a walk in your neighborhood and see what's doing well there. Hopefully you have a neighborhood where there are some people who are also into native plants. FNPS is spread all throughout the area, which is really cool. I think every neighborhood has one, at least, some much more. But see what people are using, see what's growing well. Generally, I like to purchase them a little smaller, 1 gallon or 3 gallon, depending on the size. You'll find muley and sand cordgrass, for example, in a 3 gallon. That's fine because they're huge. They get really big. One thing I think it was always important to do is when you pull that grass out of a pot where it's really root bound, make sure to scratch and scarify up those roots a little bit and at least pull them out. They get so compacted in there and grass roots are so strong that I've seen it where people plant it. A year later, it's barely started to grow out because the roots were so compacted. Just like to a lesser extent with trees, they don't have as much of a root system as these grasses would in a small pot. But if you don't treat that root system right away, you're going to have a problem longer down the road, or it just might never grow. You'll see it sometimes where, like, I put it in a year ago, I watered it all the time, it's not growing, I'll pull it out. It almost looks like it's in the same shape of that pot, and there's a few little hairs of roots coming off, and that's it. So make sure to do that as well. Reseeding. I've seen muley and Fakahatchee reseed a lot in moisture. If you have an area of your yard that actually gets irrigated, then it might be something to consider with the amount of reseeding. But that just means you can stick it in a pot and give it to your friends or let it reseed. Actually, it's really cool to kind of see where those grasses want to be. You know, the plant knows where it wants to be. We're doing the best to try to work in tandem with it. You know, imagine taking home a pet that can't talk to you. You're going to put it in the yard and hope over time, with whatever support you can give it, it'll show you where it wants to be. Some maintenance tips. Thatch. The thatch is a big thing. I think when people are trying to maintain a cleaner appearance, it's important to take out some of that thatch, the brown, the dead seed heads. Obviously, I think it's important to leave those for a certain amount of time to let them reseed or be eaten, or I think it has an ornamental value in and of itself as it's brown. You know, nothing, it doesn't have to be this bright color all the time. Brown and dark brown and light brown and dead colors are still part of the plant and the way it is naturally. Don't prune it too low, like the love grasses, like we were talking about. I pruned it way too low, like an inch above the ground, never came back. I'd be a little more cautious with the love grasses, maybe prune them to 6 to 8 inches, give them some space, and then you'll see the new grasses coming up from that. Muley grass, I've seen people bring it pretty low to the ground, but I've also seen it over pruned where it looks like this kind of strange Tatooine sand house of a muley grass that they prune all the time, and it has this like strange like little, like a basketball that got buried in the ground, and then over time it'll just kind of, it just puts out the flowers. It doesn't look right. I think don't prune it back too much. I think every couple of years is fine. If you want to prune it back every year, you totally can, but it's not necessary. And then later in the dormancy, right before the first flush of growth, let's say January, February, if we think stuff is going to pop out, let's say in March. All right, so now I want to kind of get into some of the grasses here. Awesome. So Tripsacum, this is a great one. This has been used for quite a long time. The picture on the right is not my picture. The picture on the left is mine. I tried to find one that exemplified the size of your regular Fakahatchee grass. It's also sawgrass. It does have those serrated margins. It has a very pretty seed head, kind of yellowish, puts up a pretty thick stalk. Great for your wet areas, but also can do very dry. I like it as a border. Obviously, with a regular Fakahatchee, you're looking at 4, sometimes upwards of 5 feet wide and about 4 feet tall, whereas your dwarf Fakahatchee still gets pretty large. I would say at least 3 or 4 feet wide, but stays much lower and has a smaller leaf to it. You can see in the left, this was in Snell Isle, a shell pathway, which is nice. And in between the dwarf Fakahatchee, we got some really nice dwarf firebush. Just a design idea, something you can use, but you notice how it kind of like softens the edge a little bit. I love the way that grasses do that, and you can incorporate those in there. And because they're generally so easy to plant and propagate, it's a really easy thing. It's like right away, you know, within a couple months after putting in a smaller one, it's going to grow pretty substantially, and you have a nice feature in this, for example, in this mixed border. Generally easy to take care of as well.
Stefan, how large will the dwarf Fakahatchee get? Because I've had the regular before, but I've never had the dwarf. Give us an idea of how wide and how tall it will get.
For sure, yeah. So if your regular Fakahatchee, as you've seen, is quite large, 5 feet wide, 4+ feet tall sometimes with the actual seed head, the dwarf is going to be about 3 feet wide and 2 to 3 feet tall. So just a little bit smaller, and also a smaller blade, smaller leaf blade. Still has the nice ornamental values to it. Can still do wet and dry areas, but just a little bit smaller than the dwarf, but than the regular, but not necessarily a small bunching grass. Erigrostris. This is an awesome one. The picture to the left looks like a giant blob of seeds because that's how it looks when it blooms in mass. If anybody's used Elliott's lovegrass before, it's blue and light gray, and I've almost seen a little bit of purplishness to it. It has an awesome color to it. The seed heads themselves are a very light tan, I would say, and the grasses get totally blanketed with it. This is the time of the year that you just leave it alone. Just let it do its thing. It has a beautiful show to it. I like it mixed in with more things. You know, it's just that one mass. So once that mass is done blooming, it kind of goes away and then there's like really nothing there. But in and amongst mixing with these, which we kind of touched on earlier as the nursery for other types of native plants, your plants that get tall. So for example, like giant ironweed, I've had it where it grows up. I can't wait for it to bloom. It blooms, it makes a giant umbel of flowers, and then it just flops right over. That's something where you can start mixing some of those really tall, lanky wildflowers in with these grasses so that you have something that actually supports it. You could use those Fakahatchee grasses probably to a better extent with some of the larger wildflowers, but with something like Blazing Star in here with the Elliott's Lovegrass, or any kind of yellows would be really pretty. The Coreopsis, the Black-eyed Susan. So Aragrostis elliottii, generally drier sunny spaces, but I've noticed it needs a little bit of extra water to establish itself. And then on the other side of it is Aragrostis spectabilis, which is your purple. So darker blade, about the same size, with a purple flower head. So important to mention about these lovegrass species, which, by the way, I tried to find what the reason was for the name lovegrass. There's really no specific reason. No one saw it and fell in love or something like that. Maybe they did. I don't know. That's a cute little space there, but the gentleman who has named the Aragrostris, which is not a very lovely sounding name anyway, but he called them love grasses because he just liked it. He loved them, so he called them love grasses. That's the best answer that I found for that. So I wanted to mention with these, small. So maybe a foot tall, 1.5 feet to 2 feet wide. If you notice, you can kind of see where the grass starts and the flower seeds begin. So the flower heads, the spikelets, can get double the size of the grass. So you can kind of account for that, but they don't necessarily get in the way, but it's almost like a cloud that kind of blankets the whole grass with Elliott's and purple lovegrass.
Stefan, are there more than 2 types of lovegrass?
Yes, so the reason I wanted to introduce these plants and families is because Tripsacum, Aragrostris, Muhlenbergia, all of these plant families have more relatives in them, let's say. So there are other love grasses, but we haven't gotten to the point in the native plant industry, horticulturally or ornamentally, where all of them work. So some of them might occur in very difficult areas, or it might be very hard to actually propagate and grow outside of a natural area, or they just don't have that ornamental value where people are gonna say, oh yeah, I want that in my yard. And that's a challenge with some of these native plants where they just don't look great sometimes, or they don't look great all the time, or they're difficult. So all of these, there's definitely gonna be other lovegrass and Aragrostis species. I'm gonna give you guys at the end some books that I recommend that I really like. I've really actually enjoyed learning identifying grasses, because you can go to any yard and, you know, maybe somebody's front yard has 2 or 3 shrubs in it and maybe there's 1 or 2 trees. You can go to that same 10 by 10 space in a median next to 7-Eleven and you can find 20 or 30 different grass and weed species in there. So the grasses has been really fun, just for the sake of the diversity of all of them. So yeah, definitely. There's a lot more out there. Muhlenbergia capillaris. So the picture to the left is a picture that we took. Wisehands, we maintain a large community church on Passagrill. And this was right after, you can kind of see the clippings from the green buttonwood. I clipped the bottom of the green buttonwood to give it more of a tree-like appearance. And you can see this muhler grass, I don't know why, it bloomed really early. It bloomed in like July. I'm used to it blooming much later. It could have been where it was grown, maybe a little microclimate there. Maybe I don't remember having a cold snap. It's been hot all summer. But you can kind of see, for example, how it really adds to this green buttonwood. There's that different texture there with the nice thick leaves of the green buttonwood. and that thin leaf shape. And you can kind of see there's a fair amount of space. This picture's spread out a little bit, but there's a fair amount of space in between all of those muleys. And when they first went in back last November, they were maybe a third of that size. So it looked kind of rinky dinky, not big enough. It's not gonna, but wow, they grew really fast. And, you know, I think that the brown on that flowing in the breeze, you know, on a coastal breeze where there's constantly wind coming through there, it can be just as beautiful as that purple. Honestly, if I saw purple all year, maybe I'd get sick of it. You know, if you actually have a season for something, you actually learn to enjoy it. So muley grass, very easy. That's why I want to put it on here. You've probably seen it everywhere. It's being used in medians now. It's being used in all different sorts of plantings. I love it. It's a great one to use in your yard. You don't have to be near the beach. You don't have to be in a coastal area. It actually does occur further inland as well, in flatwoods areas. Does not just occur on the beach, but it will do great in that area. You can't plant it right in salt water, but salt spray, no problem. Sandiness, well-drained soil. I've planted it in wetter areas. It doesn't do as well. It really likes that nice, well-drained soil, and it has no problem with shell, alkalinity. The size, I would give it about 4 feet wide and about 4 feet tall. So quite a large grass, not as big as the what we're going to be talking about, the cordgrass, but still quite large. The blooming generally is going to occur in fall. So anything from September, October, sometimes November, sometimes a little earlier. Like I said, these ones on the left, it was like, had to have been sometime in July or August that these guys just started putting up flower spikes. I have no idea why. The one picture on the right, I know we have some members of FNPS that volunteer out at Caladesi and Honeymoon. This is a picture from Honeymoon Island. It's just this beautiful blanket of flowers. It's really beautiful. Awesome pinkish purple, awesome ornamental value. I love muley grass.
Stefan, we had a, if you go back to that slide, we had a question about the church site there. That bed, is it planted in rock or oyster shells or?
Yeah, it's actually, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's really important to know your substrate, the soil you're dealing with. Generally in Florida, we have alkaline soils because of our limestone bedrock for the most part. And because this was a coastal planting, we use shell. So that is the coquina shell. They still, actually, I'm pretty sure they still harvest it because we have.
Stefan, we've lost your audio. I don't know if you can hear me, but we cannot hear you.
So be prepared to maintain shell pretty aggressively at first. You don't want to let weeds get established in that. That's why we were actually called out to that for our company, because it was switching over from a very traditional turf and Ixora shrubs type of environment. And then Wilcox put in.
Stefan, let me stop you for a minute.
Yeah.
We lost you for about 10 seconds there.
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that.
Go ahead and repeat.
Yeah, for sure. Can you guys hear me now? Okay.
Yes, fine.
Okay, awesome. All right. Yeah, so in this site at Pasagrille, they had switched from a very turf-centric landscape to a landscape dominant. Shell. You can buy it at Boca Ground Cover, Larry Larson's. You can get it at Home Depot, I think, in tiny bags, but don't waste your money on that. Just go get the bulk stuff. It's an awesome thing if you want to have a pathway or if you're anywhere near the beach. I think it just works so well with any kind of coastal environment. This one is really cool because it's not commonly used, but it is readily available and it's just blooming right now. It is at Wilcox. I actually snagged one for myself. I'm still out there as Wisehands, picking up plants for our customers. So I just saw it and I had to have it. It was really, really beautiful. It has a great little tuft of these seed heads, these flowers, and it's called lopsided because all the flowers and the seeds occur on one side of the bract, of the spikelet, and it really gives this very cool appearance to it when it's flowing in the wind. It kind of flops in either direction, and it's small. The actual clump of grass is only about 1 foot to 1.5 feet tall and maybe 1 foot wide. But the cool thing is that the seed heads come out almost 2, even 3 feet and are really pretty. On the left, this is a picture of it occurring in a pine flatwoods area. It does occur alongside wiregrass. So I like to mention that because I'm sure all of us have learned so much about the historic longleaf pine, the burning that happened for so long, that was so important, that was done by natural forces and native peoples for so long to keep these wide expanses and these longleaf pine areas. And we hear about wiregrass. Well, wiregrass is not that ornamentally appealing, and it's kind of hard to actually establish in a yard, but lopsided Indian grass would have occurred with that naturally as well in those pine flatwoods. So it's a cool way to mimic a wiregrass pine flatwood type area with, let's say, pines, rosin flowers, silk grass, which is not actually a grass but has a nice flower to it, and then putting in this lopsided Indian grass. So that's why I really like this one. I'm very excited that it's pretty readily available. So we got and again, like we were saying earlier, sorghastrum is a large family of grasses. There's a bunch of different sorghastrums, and they're also all called Indian grasses. Don't know why exactly. So there's many other Indian grasses that I think could have ornamental value and be used in the native plant industry, and then further in the wider horticultural industry in Florida. Spartina. So there are a couple Spartinas. There might be some of us who have gotten a chance to do some restoration plantings with maybe Keep Pinellas Beautiful or the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. I mean, there's so many awesome organizations doing so much cool stuff in our area. We're really fortunate for that. You might have heard of Spartina alternifolia, which is marsh cordgrass or smooth cordgrass, I think it's called as well. Again, ornamental value does not matter with that stuff. It's all about its ability to lock in these marshy, salty areas. So it can sit in salt water all day. Spartina bakeri is the ornamental version of that, and it does not like saltwater inundation. It can maybe do a little salt spray, but that's it. This is the big boy of all the grasses that I've seen. I've seen this get 6 feet plus wide. It has a really, really nice long spike of a leaf blade, kind of similar to a muley grass. So if you like muley grass, but you're like, you know what, it's not big enough, I need something bigger, your sand cordgrass is going to be the way to go. It does not have that blooming as nicely with those colors, but it's a great grass. I really do enjoy it. It occurs further inland. Dry, full sun areas also can do inundation with wet. So if you have an area, let's say like part of the year, it gets totally sopped up and you don't really know what to plant there, put some sand cordgrass in that place along with maybe some fakahatchee or dwarf fakahatchee, and you have some beautiful grasses there that can help to maybe suck up some of that moisture. And then you can start putting some awesome wildflowers in between there, because there's a lot of cool flowers that do well in a wetter area. So that's why I wanted to mention Spartina bakeri, the sandcord grass. And the last one I'm going to mention, and this is again a large family of plants, a Spirabolus. There's one that occurs around as considered a weed. I think maybe it'll have a ornamental value one day. It's called coral dropseed. That one isn't available yet, but this one is. Piney Woods dropseed. Also another one that I had just seen recently, put it in our yard. Very, very beautiful. Occurs also in that kind of flatwoods area. Another one, good one to kind of mimic a pine environment. It is called obviously Piney Woods Dropseed. Really, really pretty flower on it. You know, I wish these pictures could do justice, but it will at least give you maybe a little springboard to kind of look up these some of these on your own. Sporobolus junceus. I really love this one. I just planted it recently, so I haven't seen how it's going to do further in our yard. But again, it's kind of in that same wiregrass type plant, but it should be a little easier. So well drained, sandy soil, full sun to part shade. You know, you can definitely have it in part shade. It doesn't have to be in full blasting sun. Mixed in with your flatwoods type flowers. Again, your rosin flower, tropical sage, it should do well with coreopsis, blazing star, and it's going to be a fall bloomer as well. And it stays small. This one is going to be pretty small as well. Just seen it so far, about 1 foot to 2 feet tall, and the same width to it as well, with really nice flower spikes in it. So I'm experimenting with these grasses because I love them. There's so many different cool ones, and I barely even scratched the surface. There's more actually available. Black-seeded needlegrass has been started to get used a lot more lately. Just for an example of some other things that we could be hopefully seeing in the future. So I hope I didn't take up too much time going through all of that. Thank you, obviously, to FNPS and everybody who's putting so much work into this. I've now moved on to Wisehands. That is our company, myself and my fiance Mallory, and we have a couple people working with us. We still do a lot of work with Wilcox. There's our information there. Check us out on Instagram. Go check out our website. I would love to hear from anybody what we could do differently or what kind of maintenance you would like to see. It's always really helpful. I'm looking forward to working with you guys, anybody who would like to, and continue doing stuff with FNPS. It's awesome. So thank you guys.
Hey, Stefan, Bonnie had a question earlier in your presentation, and let me see if I can find it. She says, what is a failure surface?
It's about preventing erosion. So Mallory was helping me out with that. So with this is tag teams, but she put that in without explaining it fully to me. I thought, so that has to do with erosion. So generally, and what I did kind of look in that a little bit is, okay, so when you see erosion on the side of a, let's say a retention pond, if you notice, it kind of looks like there's an area that the grass is kind of holding on, like usually turf grass, and underneath it is where it's starting to rush away. That's the failure surface. So that's essentially a space where there's no roots or anything to actually hold all that soil, excuse me, soil or substrate in place. So that's kind of what that is. That has to do with that soil stabilization. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Stefan.